Welcome to the Voter Education Coalition Sales Tax Forum. I'm Thea Perry. I'm the co-chair of the coalition. The Voter Education Coalition is a nonpartisan group founded in 2003. The goal of the coalition is to provide nonpartisan education to Lawrence and Douglas County voters. The goal of this event is to assist the Lawrence voters in understanding the 3 sales tax questions on the ballot this fall. Questions have been developed by the Voter Education Coalition. Questions have also been submitted by Douglas County residents. You can find more information about the upcoming election on the VEC's website, votereducationcoalition.org. We'd like to thank the City of Lawrence for all of their assistance in putting this event together. My co-chair, Scott Creaky, will be moderating today. And with that, we'll begin with the city's presentation of each tax question.
Thank you. My name is Porter Arneal. I didn't get my name. My name is.
It's only 5.
My name is Porter Arneal, and I'm serving as the interim communications manager. So what I'm going to do is provide an overview presentation of the sales tax as it stands now, and then we have people here who can answer specific questions as we go through. So I will start with that. The purpose of this, let me start my presentation. Okay. The purpose of this presentation is to educate voters and provide a high-level overview of the proposed sales tax renewals. I'll walk through each of the ballot questions, give some context as to the impact for both individuals and the city, and outline how the funds have been used in the past. It should be noted that if approved, the city's sales tax rate will remain the same. This is a renewal proposal and would therefore not increase the city's sales tax rates. The purpose of the presentation today is for education and to provide information. It is not permissible, according to the Kansas Attorney General, to use public funds to promote or advocate for the approval or disapproval of a ballot measure. And we know that there are groups advocating on the sales tax ballot questions. Some of those are advocating for the current sales taxes to sunset, while others are advocating for their passage. So the information I'll provide today is based on facts. This table outlines the current sales tax for the City of Lawrence and the impact that it has on a $20 purchase. It should be noted that this is in general, as the city does have a few special sales tax districts that have an additional 1% sales tax. In addition, the city does receive a portion of sales tax collected by Douglas County. The 1.55% sales tax that the city receives is comprised of general operations and the approved special sales taxes that were passed in 2008, which are highlighted here in orange. So those are the existing sales taxes. These taxes are set to sunset on March 31st, 2019. What was the 2000 sales tax spent on? The 0.2% for transit was for general transit operations, purchase and maintenance of buses, transit vehicles, and other equipment, and leveraging of federal funds. The 0.3% infrastructure was for residential street maintenance, sidewalk improvements, crosswalks, trails, traffic signals, and fire apparatus. And the 0.05% was dedicated to transit expansion, which generated funds for the transit system capital improvements and hybrid electric transit vehicles. Here are the 3 sales tax renewal questions. Question number 1 remains the same, 0.2% for public transportation. Question number 2 is 0.3% for infrastructure and equipment. And 0.3 is a repurpose sales tax, 0.05% for affordable housing. All the questions are separate and independent of one another. Therefore, each will be voted upon separately and will pass or sunset individually. For question 1, the 0.2% equates to 4 cents on a $20 purchase for public transportation. If approved, it is estimated to generate approximately $4.2 million annually, or $42 million over the 10-year period. Question number 2, 0.3% equates to 6 cents on a $20 purchase for infrastructure and equipment. If approved, it is estimated to generate approximately $6.3 million annually, or $63 million over the 10 years of the sales tax. And for question number 3, the 0.05% equates to 1 cent on a $20 purchase for affordable housing. If approved, it is estimated to generate approximately $1 million annually, or $10 million over the 10 years of the sales tax. The impact of the proposal sunset in 2019 for transit, the city would have to reduce or eliminate transit services or find alternative revenue sources to fund transit. This may impact the service level of other city operations. Lawrence may also lose federal and state funds for transit. For infrastructure, without the renewal, the city will make choices on spending cuts, service reductions, and/or property tax increases. The 2018-2022 capital improvement plan assumes the passage of the infrastructure sales tax and therefore would have to be significantly reduced. The city's fire truck and equipment replacement plan would be negatively impacted. For affordable housing, the city may be limited to using the funds currently available to address affordable housing needs in the community or shift resources from other city operations. If any of the 2008 sales taxes sunset in 2019, the city's sales tax rate would decrease by the amount of the sales tax set to sunset. The sales tax renewal proposal for 2018, all approved sales taxes will be effective April 1, 2019 through March 31, 2030. If approved, the city's sales tax rate will remain the same. Each question is independent of the others. Voters will be asked to vote yes or no on each sales tax renewal question. It will be decided by a simple majority of city electors who vote on the measure. A city commission-appointed sales tax oversight committee will monitor and audit expenditures to confirm sales tax dollars are spent in accordance with the voter-approved sales tax initiatives, as it did for the 2008 sales taxes. And we have additional information at a city webpage here. And if somebody has questions that they want to ask after this meeting or other times, they can submit to this email address, and we'll track those questions and put up frequently asked questions on that webpage. And then we have information on the general election. Advanced voting begins October 18th, 2017, this week. General election is Tuesday, November 7, 2017. The polls open at 7 a.m. and close at 7 p.m. And more election information can be found on the Douglas County website. And in addition, the city has, we've generated 3 pamphlets on each of the 3 questions, which is available both in person at various places in City Hall and community centers, as well as at these public meetings. And this is also the information that's available online, along with the city's newsletter for October, which is dedicated to the sales tax questions. And that's all I have for our presentation. And now we can let some people ask questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Porter. So our first question that we have is, if one or more of the sales taxes are approved, would the sales tax audit committee continue?
Yes, that's correct. My name's Casey Toomey. I'm an assistant city manager with the City of Lawrence. The current ordinance that created the sales tax audit committee does reference the 2008 sales taxes. So an ordinance would have to be amended to insert the new date. But yes, it is the intention of the City Commission to continue the sales tax audit committee, and they will look at the revenues and expenditures from any of the sales tax questions that are approved this November, if any are approved.
Thank you. Our next question is, comes from an audience member, and is this the infrastructure sales tax? Is this the permanent solution for the transit system? Sorry, this is a transit system question. Is this the permanent solution for the transit system funding?
The real answer, I guess, to the transit system, Bob Nugent, Lawrence Transit, the real answer to the system is that we use about half of our dollars are federal dollars. In order to leverage those dollars and to use those dollars, we need local dollars for it. The real question is what the local dollars are going to be. What's before the public now is a sales tax referendum. I guess there are other ways for sure that it could be funded, but that's what's in front of the public right now.
Great, thank you. Another audience question. There is a pending study, or there's been a variety of different locations or sites identified for our transit hub. The current thinking is that smaller hubs might be more adequate. Is there been any discussion, or does it make sense for the commission to wait to see what that study suggests finalized before this tax goes in front of people?
Well, indeed, we are waiting until after the vote on the 7th. We are right now, we started a transit center location analysis back in mid-year. That study isn't going to be finalized until December of this year, so it should be about a month after the referendum is voted upon. So we really won't have a decision on the transit center until after the vote. So.
Right, and I think maybe I was not clear. The person I think was asking why vote before why vote on a tax before we have the results of that study?
Well, we have to be able to operate buses before we have a place to operate them out of. So it is kind of, it's not a chicken and the egg thing as much as you would expect. We need to know if we're going to be operating first and then commit to a major capital improvement.
We have a few more questions from the audience. Do you know how the balance between the percentages of property tax and sales tax changed after the election in 2008?
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I would say that because of the way that property taxes are allocated to our general operating fund, our bond and interest fund, and the library fund, and these sales taxes are all, over the years, we've done different accounting practices with the proceeds, but at one point, they all came into the general fund and then went out to either the transit fund or a reserve fund. Now, they are just automatically deposited into those respective funds. So the makeup of those revenues in the general fund would wash each other out. So before the 2008 sales tax, after the 2008 sales tax, since none of those were in lieu of property tax dollars, the impact on the general fund anyway would remain the same. I don't know if that's a good enough answer. I mean, we can certainly get the breakdown, but I don't have it here in front of me.
Okay. Great, thank you. If the transit fails, what will occur with KU on wheels?
KU on Wheels in the city, although at the 2008 referendum, the two key words in the .2 sales tax was merging and coordinating with the university. We haven't merged necessarily. We are still two separate entities. We are very highly coordinated. The KU service would continue to operate, but they would also, in doing that, if we weren't there to provide a complimentary service to them, it would cost them a lot more to operate. So they would have to use resources in other ways or pulling off certain routes. An example would be we have two major routes that we coordinate and cooperate in funding with. One is to the southwest and one is to the south center of our community. Both of those are very high ridership, and we are funding about half of that as the city to support that service. So without it, they're going to have to come up with a lot more funding to do that.
Thank you. I guess this would go to all three questions. What are some of the impacts that would happen if the sales tax, each one fails?
I'll go first since I didn't get to introduce myself yet. Chuck Stolz, I'm the Public Works Director. Currently, our CIP for 18 through 22 assumes that the infrastructure sales tax will pass. If it does not pass, then those projects will be significantly reduced or pushed out to later years, as well as our maintenance for residential street maintenance that would be significantly impacted. Speaking from the fire side, again, in the 2018 through 2022 capital improvement program that we've adopted, those pieces of equipment that they're expecting to be able to use some of the sales tax on would not be able to be acquired.
For transit, without the passage of the sales tax, as I alluded to earlier, 50% of our funding is coming from the federal government. Without the available dollars to match those federal funds, we wouldn't have even federal funds. So an example of that would be if we have a $1 local, we can put $2 of service on the street. Without that $1 local, we have nothing to put out on the street. So it really comes down to having local dollars to be able to leverage other dollars. We do get some funding from the state, but that's more that's rewarded more on performance of our service. So if we have local dollars and federal dollars to put service on the street, then as a result of ridership and revenue miles and stuff, we do get funding back from the state as a result of that. So once again, without those local dollars to leverage the federal dollars, we wouldn't have that, even the state dollars coming back in.
Regarding the question about affordable housing, the city currently has $300,000 in our capital improvement plan, and then $350,000 of bond proceeds for affordable housing. That would be the resources that we have identified to address affordable housing without having to make an adjustment and reduce another area of expenditures in order to increase the city's resources for affordable housing.
Right, thank you. This is regarding housing. The proposal indicates investing in public-private partnerships for the construction and provisions of affordable housing. How would the private entities be vetted, and how would the level of public funds be allocated?
Sure. The city currently has an Affordable Housing Advisory Board. That board, by ordinance, is charged with reviewing and making recommendations for allocations out of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. They currently have had two different processes that they would rely upon as they talked about how to allocate the dollars from the sales tax. One, an RFP, and one, one, a call for applications. Both the RFP and the application contained a number of different criteria that the proposals were reviewed against by the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. Recommendations came out of that board and went to the City Commission, and I have every I think it's safe to assume that that same process would be used for the sales tax. I think that was the question about what the process would be. The first part was about how would they be vetted.
Mm-hmm.
I think that with all proposals that come before the city has an obligation to do some form of due diligence and look into the ability of a developer or a private entity to follow through on the promises and commitments that they would make in any application. I guess I'd stop right there.
Thank you. If this is again housing, if the Affordable Housing Initiative passes, will it be funded? Let me tell you, my generation doesn't read cursive. Will the funds be used to repair and maintain existing funding or housing, or will the fund be allocated to build new housing?
I think the ballot language would allow both. It speaks to improving the quality, availability, and affordability of housing in Lawrence, acquiring land for future affordable housing units, investing in partnerships, as you just mentioned, and other related affordable housing purposes. I know that as the Affordable Housing Advisory Board has done their work over the past 2 years, they see there's a sort of a spectrum of housing needs. And I think rehab and rehabilitation of existing properties certainly is one way that the city could help put towards resources in maintaining affordability of housing. So I think that it's likely that some of the funds would be used to rehabilitate existing properties.
Great, thank you. This would be for all three sales taxes. What can the residents of the county expect in terms of transparency and how the money is being spent?
Well, I would say, I'm assuming you're talking about the city.
Yes.
As far as transparency goes, all of the projects that we do get approved by the city commission. They're part of the budget process. As Casey mentioned, the sales tax audit committee will be reestablished to review expenditures and revenues. We have, from the public works perspective, many of our street projects get vetted in the public, project by project, as far as what we're doing, when we're doing it, how we're doing it. We invite the neighborhoods to meetings on numerous occasions to go over projects. We present our annual street maintenance program to the commission. That will be coming up here this winter. We constantly take community input and feedback. And then another large portion of the funding will also be for sidewalks, bike lanes, and ADA ramps. We have the pedestrian and bicycle task force recommendations. Again, that will still go to the city commission for final project selection. We have a number of committees looking at a number of different things. The Complete Streets Committee, Safe Routes to Schools Group are all looking at these projects. So as far as transparency goes, I think all of our projects are out there for people to provide input on.
Thank you.
Just maybe add that as far as the affordable housing ballot initiative goes, as I mentioned, the Affordable Housing Advisory Board would, on the front end, look at recommendations for allocation of the dollars. Then again, the Sales Tax Audit Committee would be reviewing those on the back end. Obviously, any expenditure of city dollars over a certain dollar amount comes before the City Commission for their approval. We always post our agenda items that would contain those items weekly when we have meetings. Also, our annual budgeting process and our capital improvement planning process and have a public input component to those. So we try really hard to be transparent as far as what the city does with tax dollars. That's not to say we couldn't improve, and we're always open to hearing those improvements. But as far as affordable housing goes, Transit also has an advisory board, and as Chuck mentioned, several of transportation items do as well. So I think there's a nice balance of citizen input on the front end, and then again, the Sales Tax Audit Committee on the back end.
Well, they pretty much said everything that I needed to say, other than every year we do go through a process to involve the public to talk about changes to our routes and changes to service. Even though we may not have any changes, we still go to the public and we need their input. It helps us in our planning process over the years. But we do have Public Transit Advisory Committee, which views everything that we do, and it all goes through the public process, through the commission and TAC and other things that we go through, Transportation Advisory Committee, which is part of the MPO that reviews a lot of what we do also. So,
Thank you. This is a housing question. Would the community shelter be eligible for increased housing vouchers to help families move into transitional housing?
In 2016, the City Commission did approve spending proceeds from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund on a voucher program through the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority that was aimed at helping individuals, particularly families with children, who were currently living at the Lawrence Community Shelter. Those vouchers provided them with, I believe, 24 months of transitional housing assistance to help them move out of the community shelter and into transitional housing, and hopefully on their way to more permanent affordable housing.
Great. Question from the audience. Around infrastructure. There has been an ongoing effort to try to repair our streets and maintain our streets. There is a perception that cost of growth is paid by the growth itself, so growth pays for itself. Why is this tax initiative is necessary if growth pays for itself?
So for new developments and stuff, they are obviously paying for the installation of new roads. Our standards and specifications have improved over the decade, so that our improvements will be longer lasting. But it's just, and I use this analogy a lot, it's just like at your home. You have to continually, whether it's caulking around windows so that, you know, the moisture doesn't get into the walls and stuff like that. It's the same principle. Maintenance is an ongoing process. You know, we've done a lot with different types of applications. We're doing more crack sealing. We're doing more microsurfacing, so that we don't have to get to that major reconstruction. But there are also a lot of older streets that need more work. And back in the 80s and 90s, we saw a lot of aggregate that was used that today we know that aggregate was substandard, and we are replacing that with a more durable aggregate for our curb and gutters. So maintenance is a never-ending process, and if you don't maintain the infrastructure that you have, you know, $1 spent today on maintenance will cost you $10 tomorrow, and we see that time and time again. If we let things go, things just end up costing more in the future.
Thank you. Public transportation question. Has the city studied the economic impact of public transportation investment?
The city really hasn't studied that, but one of the numbers that's used a lot by the American Public Transit Association, which is the largest transit association in the United States, is that between $4 and $6 return for every dollar invested in public transit. Now, of course, you get to the $6 side, and that may be in the New York cities, but you know, for the most part, there's a significant return on investment.
Infrastructure question. Would any of the funding for sidewalks be used for maintenance on private property?
At this point, the ballot language basically reads that it will be used for, let's see, installation of accessible ramps, bikeways, trails, recreational paths, traffic calming, curb and gutter, and sidewalks. The City Commission, a few months ago, basically our policy is that sidewalk maintenance is the adjacent property owner's responsibility, and that decision stands. So we've got a number of needs for sidewalk gaps, safe routes to schools, ADA ramps, just finishing those connections, which is what this is, the sales tax is going to be used for.
This is also an infrastructure question geared towards sidewalks. I believe there's been a lot of discussion of the need for a maintenance program. How much would be needed to fund a citywide maintenance program?
We've done the study. I can't remember the numbers. I don't have the information right here. But again, the infrastructure sales tax at this point is not intended to be a maintenance program funding source.
Thank you. Transit question. If the transit tax passes, are there plans to reinstall a hard rail trolley? It looks like from Lawrence maybe to KU and connecting downtown with campus.
There's a long history of transit in this community. And yes, indeed, Mississippi and that whole road network and the whole roadbed was built to make it easy for trolleys, horse-drawn or mule-drawn trolleys to get up to campus. No, we don't have any intention on doing that. I will say that when we're looking into 10 years of a budget and operating, who knows what could be in front of us. It could be Uber-esque kind of service. It could be trolleys. It could be a number of things. We don't want to rule out anything. But these dollars are intended for operating. What we are operating is, I guess, the question, and in the future would still have to present us with. So.
Right. Thank you. Once again, this would be to all three. I did talk about what would happen if they did not pass, but can each of you speak in detail about what would happen if each of the sales tax is passed, and if possible, what order?
If possible, what?
What order would?
What order?
Yeah.
again, this is all subject to city commission approval. But at this point, we have approximately $1 million a year anticipated additional for residential street maintenance, which would be $10 million over the 10 years. A program of about $500,000 a year, $5.5 million just for residential curb repair. We have approximately $9.5 million for sidewalk, bike lanes, ADA ramps, and other improvements. We have also a list of projects in the 5-year CIP right now. Some improvements to the intersection at 13th and Mass, Castle from Clinton Parkway to Hy-Vee, 23rd Street from Haskell to the east city limits, and Wakarusa from 18th to 23rd. And this is just in the current 5-year CIP. You know, the CIP gets approved annually, and we have a 5-year plan. So those out years, while we have some ideas, that hasn't been presented and approved by the commission at this point. For fire apparatus, I just happen to have the list. They've got some unit 634, which is a investigation unit, apparatus bay exhaust system, 645 replacement, which is rescue number 5. There's unit 614, which is a quint. Their self-contained breathing apparatus and mobile radios would all be included within that 5-year CIP.
As far as affordable housing goes, I think the Affordable Housing Advisory Board is recommending that the city conduct a housing study. That's actually on the agenda for consideration by the City Commission tomorrow night. I think the board would anticipate using the results of that housing study as early as next spring to start coming up with some priority initiatives and maybe painting more of a menu of what those dollars would be used for. Kind of the concept at this point, without the results of that housing study, is to look back at what we've used Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars for in the past. And those include voucher programs, like we just mentioned, acquisition of property, both to put in the trust for future development of affordable housing, but then also to work on those public-private partnerships to leverage dollars to construct new units. As far as construction of units goes, the Affordable Housing Advisory Board has talked again across that spectrum of need as far as affordable housing goes. So that could look like elderly cottages, which is something else that Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars have paid for in the past. We've heard there is need for housing for people with disabilities. That's something that Housing Trust Fund dollars could be used for. Other programs in the past that Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars have been used for were the Homeless to Housed program. And the list goes on as far as what other programs have been completed. Again, the ballot language speaks to providing and improving the quality, availability, and affordability of housing. So programs obviously would have to be consistent with that ballot language.
A little bit different for transit in that these funds were intentioned on operating a service, so they're operating dollars. There are a number of things that we do have kind of scheduled for this process. One, last year we finished a comprehensive operational analysis, which for those that you don't know what that means, it's a mouthful, is that we had an organization come in and look at everything that we do and how we do it and make recommendations on how to change and how to improve what we're doing. Included in that was all kinds of things from fares and our rate of fares to the structure of our routes and even governance and how we were governed, and made recommendations for all of those. So of course we would look at that comprehensive operational analysis and see what we could apply in the future. The second, and probably the most important, that would be driving our decisions in the future is the outcome of our transit center location analysis, which is supposedly to be completed in December. That will help direct us on whether we restructure all our routes in our service, how they will be restructured, and how the service will continue into the future. Our plans for quite a long time has been, starting back in 2008, we had service out there at 40 minutes and 80 minutes. That means a bus would come by every 40 or 80 minutes to where you were located. We now have the majority of our routes coming by every 30 minutes. We still have some that need to have that adjustment made to them, so that would be included in what we'll be targeting to do in the future. Another thing that would come out of also the transit center's location analysis would be additional amenities throughout our system. We have been kind of holding off for several years now and committing to a lot of amenities in our system, not knowing what would happen to those amenities if we ended up having to change our service and change where our routes are, which means we could invest $5,000 to $10,000 in location for an amenity and then maybe have to turn around and move it, which we would end up losing a lot of at least the resources we put into that. So as part of this transit center analysis, we would also want to look at secondary locations, the locations that we could apply more amenities to our system. So.
Thank you. This is regarding housing. If the city purchases lands as proposed for affordable housing, will the city continue to own the land or sell it to private partners?
I don't have the specifics of that available at this point. What I would say is that the Affordable Housing Advisory Boards, one of their primary goals is to look at that affordability of housing in perpetuity, or keeping it affordable for as long as period of time. So I would say that my assumption is that the Affordable Housing Advisory Board would look to recommend either the city owning the land or the city working with one of our existing agencies in our community, tenants to homeowners, for example, Habitat for Humanity, Douglas County Housing Authority, that they may own the land in order that the any units that would be constructed, obviously on that land, would remain affordable for a much longer period of time.
A general question for all three sales tax. Is there any misunderstanding in the community that you would like to address?
The number one is that this is a renewal. And there has been a lot of conversation in the community about this being an additional tax, and this is just a renewal. There has been some repurposing of that .05 that was transit is now going toward housing, and other than that, it's still the .55.
That's what I was going to say.
I think the Affordable Housing Advisory Board spent some time at their meeting recently discussing that while we don't have an itemized plan similar to our city's capital improvement plan, the Affordable Housing Advisory Board does have some clearly defined goals that they adopted. They also have a track record of what the Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars have been spent on in the past, and just want to make sure that the public is aware of those. We have some documents out on the Affordable Housing Advisory Board's webpage that outline what proceeds have been used for in the past and what those goals are.
Thank you. This is a transit question. If the transit tax fails and the service level remains as currently, at the current level, what would a rider be, I guess, what would the fare for the rider be?
Ooh, what would be the actual cost of providing the trip? On fixed route, it would probably be around $6 a trip. On paratransit, would it be about $26 a trip? So it's a significant increase. We are well underwritten by federal and state dollars.
Thank you. The last question I have, unless there's other audience questions, is just kind of a general question once again for all of the tax questions is, what should voters know before they go to the polls on November 7th?
I would encourage them to look at the ballot language ahead of time, read it, and understand what it means. If folks have questions about what it means, certainly they can call or look on our website. But I would also encourage them to find out when and where to vote, and just make sure, regardless of whether or not they vote for or against the ballot initiatives, that they do go out and vote.
Thanks. Well, hearing nothing and having no more questions, on behalf of Thea Perry and myself and the Voter Education Coalition, thank you so much for attending. This will be replayed multiple ways. You can go to our website at votereducationcoalition.org and find out the replay times and watch a YouTube video. Other than that, have a wonderful day. Thank you.